What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel Anime Fiction. I'm back with a new episode of Naruto Reincarnated as a Hollow with a System Part 3. And if you did enjoy the video, give it a like and review my channel, like my content, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more crossover fictions. Now let's begin this new video.
Chapter 21. Previously, in the same warehouse. Mito awoke with a severe headache that made it difficult to form a logical thought. What am I doing? What occurred? She questioned, dazed. The last thing she recalls is leaving the office building. She heard a car door slam, someone grab her, and then nothing. She tried but couldn't get up. She attempted to concentrate and saw she was tied to a chair. Her arms were bound behind her, and her legs were cuffed to the legs of the chairs, making movement impossible. She saw as she opened her eyes. Well, it just appeared to be a boring room. A couch and a coffee table were present. A table and chairs. However, there are no windows. She might be almost any place. There was also no one else present. Why was I taken? Is anyone familiar with Naruto? Is this something to do with the company? Did we irritate anyone? She attempts to recall all of her recent interactions. Everything from unpleasant business meetings to disastrous dates she'd had was on the table. However, nothing stuck out as really horrible. Her personal life had been rather dull in recent times, despite her dead brother reappearing as a monster, because the company had been so busy she hadn't had much time to date or hang out with others for non-business reasons. She couldn't think of any angry workers. She knew the majority of the other employees because the company was still tiny. Though the company's quick expansion may have caused them to walk on some people's toes, none of it appeared significant enough to warrant this. While she was lost in thinking, she heard someone unlock the door. She closed her eyes and fell in her chair before they could see she had awoken. Several persons arrive at the same moment. The first says, she should wake up soon. It was noticeable that we were speaking in English rather than Japanese, as she had expected. We'll make the call when she wakes up, he says. Are you sure they can get the money? Asks a second. The money is nice, but what we really want is their code for generating digital certificates and signatures, which we can sell for much more, says the first. She must buy as much time as possible for Naruto or the police to notice her absence and follow her down. For the time being, the best option is to continue pretending to be unconscious. Though they kept chatting, it appeared that they were prepared to be overheard because they didn't say anything that might be used to identify them, what their past was, or if they were part of any kind of organization. Nothing about themselves or their group was discussed, with the exception of their current acts. Okay, we don't have much time, we need to get moving. She got slapped unexpectedly. That ached like hell. She wouldn't be able to keep faking it for long before it became obvious. She noticed 3 men in the room. They were dressed in what appeared to be SWAT squad gear, including a balaclava, making it impossible to recognize and remember them. It was clear they were professionals of some type. They didn't converse, and they didn't appear to be a hastily assembled bunch. The man who slapped her was close enough for her to observe his sparkling blue eyes, which she made a point of remembering. The other 2 were too far away to detect anything out of the ordinary. Bring the phone, and make sure the rest of the team is alert, said the main guy. Where are you, brother? She was concerned that he would find her. When she thought of her brother, she felt her chest heat up to the point that she felt like she was on fire. Something seemed to be pulling at her wrist as well, and the scorching sensation began to spread from her chest down her arm and into the bracelet. She felt the bracelet go from her wrist into her hand after a few moments of this flowing sensation. It reminded me of a frigid rod. She felt like she was brimming with energy as soon as it stopped moving. She appeared to have consumed an entire 6-pack of energy drinks. What is wrong with my body? She reasoned. The temperature surrounding her began to rise swiftly. The cuffs caught fire, burned red hot, and then dazzling white. Despite not burning her flesh, they began melting off her in a matter of seconds. The leftover slag sizzled to the ground. She stood up and beheld in her hand a gorgeous ornate silver scepter with the diamond from her bracelet trapped by the silver. She intuitively felt a connection to it. Above the gem, a little flame appeared. When she concentrated on it, it developed quickly before bursting into a stream that set fire to the ceiling. She was able to guide it and send it to the closest male after putting her will on it. The other 2 attempted to put out the fire, but before they could, she launched the fireball that was the source of the fiery stream. It hit and burst, engulfing all three of them in flames like a napalm explosion. Her fire seemed alive and growing faster than a normal fire in her wrath and being fed by her spirit power, engulfing the entire room in barely any time at all. She sensed something familiar approaching them outside the room. What is it? She pondered as she approached the door. The guys were no longer a menace. The wall shattered, revealing Naruto, yet she was the only one who saw him. Mito couldn't speak because the speed they were traveling at was fast enough to steal her breath away. They arrived in a dark lane not far from their house before she could properly acclimate. Naruto slowly let her down. The scepter reverted to her bracelet, thereby proving his suspicions. He made sure she had time to regain her breath. "How are you feeling?" he inquired, worried. "It's all right now," she said. "You can't go back, but a lot happened, so we need to get your story straight. First and foremost, what happened and why were you there?" he questioned, wondering what had transpired to put her in such a scenario. "I was leaving the office when they grabbed me. I was out for a bit after that. When I woke up, I was already in that building. I heard a car door behind me before they grabbed me, so they must have knocked me out, dragged me into a car, and driven me there," she explains. "So they were waiting for you near your car. I would have suggested bodyguards, but I guess that's no longer necessary," he chuckles dryly. "Yeah, I don't think normal people can kidnap me anymore. I pretended to be asleep for a while, and they talked. They were targeting me because of the company. They were going to use me to get money, and they were going to sell some of the code and keys," she reveals. Naruto, it all made clear now. With international media interest and the corporation now gaining the attention of the authorities, he could have foreseen this. He had simply overestimated Japan's security. Aside from otherworldly perils, the safety. Originally, it would have been good for the police to know about the event and investigate further, he says, but the place going up in flames and you coming out completely unscathed means that it probably isn't the smartest anymore. "Okay. That makes sense," she says, nodding. They'd have a lot of questions for her if she turned up the way she was now, compared to how they left the warehouse. Not only was there a large fire, but he may have broken through a few walls when he hurried out with her to get away from the fire and escape being recognized by police. With that fire, most of the evidence of your presence should be pretty well covered up, and even though I destroyed some of the walls, they'll probably attribute that to the fire as long as it's left to burn for a little longer, he speculates. "So, what are we going to do now? What was that power?" she says. He notices she is trembling slightly. He's not sure if it's just the adrenaline wearing off or anything more. "Awakening that power would have put a lot of strain on your body, especially after being drugged, knocked out, and kidnapped. You need to get some rest. Meanwhile, I'll go back and spend the night on watch there in case they have more members or some kind of backup to come check on them. We'll talk about that power tomorrow," he said, leaning over and gently pressing his forehead against her. This was the closest he could come to showing affection because his stature and bladed arms prevented him from hugging her as he did now. She hugged him back, wrapping her arms around his mask. "Thank you for being there, and I love you," she says softly. Despite being filled with adrenaline and her newfound power, she was clearly impacted by the entire incident. "I love you, too, sis," he responds. He sent her go and followed her home to ensure she arrived before returning to the warehouse. When he arrived, the fire had already engulfed the entire warehouse and piqued the interest of some individuals who were watching from a distance. It didn't take long for police and, shortly after, firefighters to arrive. The fire took a long time to extinguish. It was most likely caused by the fact that the fire was not natural. Meanwhile, he kept his spiritual senses alert for any strange activity in the neighborhood. He had to tweak his senses somewhat to pay more attention to lower spirit power persons because he generally completely outperforms those from his senses, or he would have to cope with much too much information and might miss the crucial ones. The night was going to be long. "While I have nothing better to do, what was that skill I had, system?" he inquires of his system. "Energy sword. Allows the user to employ his spirit power to cloak any blade-like object. Can be utilized as an improvement to the blade or as a ranged attack after performing a slicing or thrusting action." Sweet. So I can now act like Getsuga Tenchi. He was quite enthused about experimenting with this new skill. The answer is yes. A move comparable to Getsuga Tenchi could be accomplished by using the skill and firing it off while slashing. Instead, firing it during a thrust would produce something more comparable to an energy ray. Damn. I need to train this skill as soon as I finish up here. I can't really practice it in the city, though. If it is even remotely close to Getsuga Tenshin power, then firing it off is not going to be environmentally friendly. It would probably also draw the entire local Shinigami squad if I did, even if it turns out that spirit power concealment is powerful enough to conceal its spirit power emission, he thinks. He waited by the warehouse all night, making sure his spiritual senses extended over a mile beyond the wreckage, but even after the fire department extinguished the fire and the police cordoned off the area, leaving very few people to handle the wreckage and investigation, no one suspicious showed up all night. Hopefully, this was an isolated bunch, and we were able to eliminate the entire group at once. In case it wasn't, having the police investigate would have been preferable, but I guess not everything can go your way. At least she's fine, and it appears they don't have any additional members or backup, he muses. He'll make sure to keep a closer eye on his sister for the next few days, even if it means briefly slowing down his grinding. He can't risk there being more of them and them taking further action. Though she should be able to protect herself now, he moans. Part of him is relieved she can now defend herself, but that is normal human civilization. Being a Fullbringer means she is practically fully safe from normal humans, but there are other threats for a Fullbringer to consider. He'd look for a Fullbringer to instruct her. If he could, he would want to teach her himself, but due to his hollow status and the manner in which he learns system skills, he finds it difficult to teach someone else. He doesn't want her to get involved with execution and go Ginge, therefore getting a Fullbringer's teacher is also out of the question. He'll have to find it out eventually. He goes back to his house early in the morning to meet Mito. Mito rushes out of the house after breakfast and embraces him. Why do I have power? She exclaims as she shakes his arm. It appears like a good night's sleep softened the blow of yesterday's occurrences. So it appears you were sufficiently affected by my spirit power to become a Fullbringer, which is a high spirit power human with hollow spirit power mixed in, he continues. Why is it called that? Are you just making it up? She inquires. With the hole in his chest, she could understand hollow, but Fullbringer seemed like an odd name. Well, it allows you to bring out the soul of objects, thus the bringer part, he explains, skirting the question of why he knows these names. Her discovering and explaining being a hollow was unintentional and complicated enough. Explaining that he was genuinely reborn was a whole other level of complicated, much alone the implications that in his previous existence this entire universe was a work of fiction. There is no reason for such pessimistic debates when it doesn't matter anyway. He felt like he was still alive, and he felt the same way about his family. So, what exactly does that mean? Well, I don't know the exact details because I don't have any experience with it, and though your powers do have a relation to hollows, it's a very distant connection, he explains. My powers work on a very instinctual level, considering hollows are normally little more than mindless beasts. For example, by manipulating the soul in objects, you should be able to affect them to some degree, such as moving them, but also assist in your own movement. Or by condensing or fixing in place water or air, you could stand on those. There's probably a lot you could do by using this part of your power in creative ways, he begins explaining her power's possibilities. However, unlike mine, because you don't have a spirit body, your power is heavily reliant on your physical body, which means that to improve your ability to use your power, you would need to improve your body, he teases her. Wait, I have to exercise? That's not fair, she exclaims, frowning. Though she is fit, she is more of a bookworm than a gym goer. Yep, the stronger your physique, the more power you'll be able to use, he says, nodding. Arg. Fine. At least I have powers, she replies, her arms crossed and pouting. He would have smirked if he had lips. She had become a lot older, yet she still had her cute moments. Well. Moving on. Another part of your power is what you did back in the warehouse. Sometimes, for items you have a particularly strong connection with, you are able to pull out their soul and infuse your own soul to manifest them into objects with special powers. I can't tell you much about the powers you got from yours because it's not some kind of standardized power. Okay. So I'll have to experiment. She's already stopped pouting, having forgotten how upset she was when thinking about her new abilities. Also, after the bad news, there is some good news. Just as my hollow spirit power is what awakens you, It should continue to stimulate your Fullbringer's powers simply by being around me, he explained. Though he knew it would have a far smaller effect than bringing her to Hueco Mundo with him, that wasn't a chance he was prepared to take, so he avoided informing her about it. She appeared even more ecstatic, having discovered a way to become stronger with minimal work simply by hanging out with Naruto. You'll still need to exercise, he quickly destroyed her dreams. Over time, we'll try to figure out some better ways to improve your power, he says, but for now, just focus on improving your physique and experimenting with your power. Masaki's onslaught was soon approaching, and happily, he had progressed to the point where he should be able to easily crush Grand Fisher. It had been just over a month since the incident. Mito has done an excellent job of training outside of office hours. She wasn't very powerful, but she was strong enough to defeat a weak hollow and flee from the ordinary ones. After some experimenting, she discovered that she could not only utilize fire with her scepter, but also other elements. She appears to have evolved into a sorceress. Meanwhile, it was best not to say anything about him experimenting with his energy sword. He did not inadvertently demolish a portion of a forest and mountain when he became very thrilled and pushed a lot of spirit power into the motion. Mission: save Masaki Kurosaki. Reward: transcribe skill. Wow, I'll even get a prize, he reflected to himself. Naruto informed Mito that he would have to travel for a few months to attend to some important business in Karakura town, but that he would be back in 2 to 3 months at the most. He also reminded her to flee if she encountered anything weird while he was gone. If things became really awful, she could go to Karakura town and locate him. Naruto made himself invisible before expanding his wings and flying into the sky. He didn't want any Shinigami to spot him while he flew. Although his walking speed was faster, there was no way to proceed in a straight line through cities, therefore flying was faster. In metropolitan areas, there was a means to move in a straight path, but it included a lot of property devastation and death. Naruki City and Karakura town were actually extremely close, so he only had to fly for approximately half an hour to get there. When he arrived, he used his illusory aura to seem as a somewhat older version of his human form in order to trick any spiritually sensitive individuals and practice his talent. He eventually decided to make himself look like he was 23 at the conclusion of his first life, but with the appearance of his second life. He puts on a pair of well-fitting black pants and a deep purple buttoned shirt. He was going through Karakura town at a leisurely speed, looking for the Kurosaki clinic. Though he was familiar with the area when he saw a spectacled collegiate beauty with long, wavy violet hair and purple eyes approaching towards him on the street. She was dressed in a baggy cream-colored hoodie with a black dress that came to just above her knees underneath, but the hoodie did nothing to conceal her slim body. She was also dressed in black kitten heel shoes. Something seemed to be bothering her since she was walking uncomfortably. She appeared to be mumbling a lot to herself. He believed he heard a "it's nothing." She has a nice figure. Kind of a babe, really. People with natural violet, pink, or blue hair is still a bit of an adjustment, even after all these years, he thinks to himself. She flushed bright red and turned to face him. You can't hear me, right? He asks, hoping that her reaction was just a fluke. She had stopped walking away from him and nodded cautiously by this point. In that case, I'm just a figment of your imagination, he says, attempting to make something up on the fly. Except for his sister, he is rarely seen by ordinary people. He sighed as he saw she wasn't buying it. I'm sorry. I didn't think anyone could hear or see me, but that was still rude of me, he apologizes, bowing to her. She was still red and responded cautiously, It's okay. Well, Miss Uzumaki Naruto, he continues, it was a pleasure to meet you. Haruko, she says, too embarrassed to say anything else. Well, in that case, you can call me Naruto, he replies, winking at her. She seemed to have progressed from embarrassed and angry to embarrassed and shy. Well, since we ran into each other, I was hoping you could help me out a little, he continues. Okay, she says tentatively. I'm new to town and looking for the Kurosaki clinic, but I can't find it for the life of me. Could you help me find it? He asks, his face flushed with shame. It would be really simple if he could simply consult his address book, but illusions aren't physical, and he still doesn't have hands. She has a lovely smile. Of course I can, she answers as she approaches him. She reached for his arm as they walked, but he swiftly and awkwardly moved aside because his appearance was simply visual, and touching him would be horrible. Sorry, I have a social phobia, but I'm working on it, he explained. But you seem to be talking just fine with me, she said, her eyes narrowing in suspicion.
Ha ha ha. Well, it used to be so bad I couldn't even talk to people, but now talking is fine. The irony that his reason wasn't entirely false, given that he couldn't talk to anybody until his sister, wasn't lost on him. Her gaze becomes less inquisitive. Is that so? She inquires. If it weren't, how could I avoid such a cute girl as yourself? He taunted her, thinking that by teasing and admiring her, she would forget about his weird conduct. The slowly retreating flush returned in full force, and she completely forgot about it as she brought him to the clinic while making small talk. It was also beneficial to learn more about the area and Haruko herself. To be honest, it's an amazing delight to be able to talk to another person. I love my sister, but even if it's better than when I couldn't talk to anyone, one person isn't enough, he thinks to himself. Naruto could finally see the clinic he had been looking for, though he was no longer in a rush. It was much better to be able to converse and walk with a gorgeous female.
Well, Haruko, it's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you, and thanks for the help, you're a lifesaver, he said with a smile. She gives him a beautiful smile. Me, too. Are you going to be in town? She inquired, a little anxiously. I'll be here for the next 2 or 3 months, he says. Do you think we could meet again? She asks, combing her finger through her hair. Well, I probably have 2 months to waste just keeping a watch on the Kurosaki family, and it's been great talking with her, he shrugs. Sure. Where can I usually find you? He said, because he couldn't give his address because he didn't have one. She burst out laughing when she was asked where she lived. I'm currently staying at Karakura University's women's dorms, she replied. Alright. Do you have a phone in your room, or is there one shared in the dorm? He inquired. She provided him her dorm number and extension, as well as approximate instructions to Karakura University. I'll see you there then, he answered, smiling. He redirects his focus to the Kurosaki clinic down the street after she has left. The welcome area in front of the house appears just like it did in the episode. He proceeds into an abandoned adjacent alley where he had gone from looking like an older version of his former self to being invisible, and double verifies that his spirit power is still entirely hidden before returning to the front of the building for a closer look. Masaki is on reception duty at the clinic, and a small Ichigo is helping her. Yuzu and Karen are both involved in the game. Karen, predictably, is bouncing a ball around the room. Her fascination appears to have begun at a young age. Meanwhile, Yuzu is amusing herself with 2 wooden dolls. Ichigo was unlike anyone else in the show. He was a bright young man with a big smile who assisted the patients. He was far from his usual emo persona on the show. Hisashi nearly felt horrible for still subjecting him to the agony of losing his mother and feeling responsible. Unfortunately for Ichigo, his present strategy involved as much risk as he was willing to take, regardless of how much sympathy he felt for the family's loss of Kurosaki Masaki. At least they'd get her back eventually, unlike his first family, and he hasn't spoken to his parents in years and probably won't for a long time. He felt like 6 years of sadness was nothing in comparison, and he wasn't going to jeopardize his and his family's safety to solve it. When I reach Vasto Lord or Arankar levels of power, I may consider interfering in the timeline to protect myself and people close to me. However, unless this is the most significant amount of change. It didn't take long for him to see Ishin while he was releasing a patient. It didn't take long for me to see him acting like an idiot. Some things, unlike Ichigo, don't seem to change. While waiting for the next appointment, he sits down and plays with one of the wood dolls with little Yuzu. Ichigo is unquestionably a mama's boy. Even if his father is no longer in the office, he is still entirely focused on assisting his mother and attracting her attention. He was considering how to approach the situation. The meteorological situation during Masaki's death was really helpful. He doesn't know when it will happen, only that it will be within the next 3 months, but he knows it will rain, so he only needs to be on high alert when it rains. Imagine having to stalk someone for 3 months straight with complete concentration. You'd go nuts from it. While keeping an eye on the family, he reflected on his progress over the previous month. Halloween XP plus 45000, Animal Spirits plus 2250, XP, pluses, Humans plus 150, XP. XP. 14,210 30,860ths, additional levels, additional stat points. XP. 30,750 31,650ths, plus 450 Hollow Spirit Power, pluses, Human Spirit Power plus 2. Plus 30 Spirit Power gained through passive absorption. Spirit Power. 18712, 19194, Status Panel, he instructed the system. Equals Status Board equals, Naruto Uzumaki's name, Spiritual Age, 52. Ethnicity. Hollow, Rank, Null, Level, 78 to 79. XP. 30,750 31,650ths, equals Stats, equals, Power, 34 to 35, 45 Dexterity. Article 15 of the Constitution, 20 Intelligence. Spirit Power. 18712, 19194, Stat Points available, 0. Equals Passive Ability. Equals, Absorption of Spiritual Energy. Extremely Fast Regeneration, Acidic Note, equals Active Abilities equals. Separation of Soul and Body, Spirit Power Hiding. Aura of Illusion. Blut, Energy Sword. The leveling speed had reached the limit of what he could do with ordinary Hollow. Despite increasing his patrol range and speed as much as he could with his growing powers over the last month, he was still unable to advance more than 2 levels. Thankfully, spirit strength did not follow such a pattern and develop significantly. He would have felt desperate if he had stayed on Earth and delayed his growth if it hadn't been for that. While in Karakura town, he won't be able to patrol like he did in Naruki City because he needed to keep an eye on the Kurosaki family, and any sudden drop in the amount of Hollow in Karuka town, no matter how well he could hide using his illusory aura and spirit power concealment, will draw the attention of Aizen and probably Kazuki. This would hinder his journey until he was no longer in Karuka town. At the very least, he'd be able to focus on honing his skills while he was in town. At the very least, he'd be practicing his illusory aura and spirit power concealment throughout the entire time, because he refused to disclose his true appearance at any point during his stay in case he was recognized by anyone. He would be either invisible or appear in a different form at all times. Naruto had been following the Kurosaki family, particularly Masaki and Ichigo. On rainy days, he followed them carefully, but on sunny days, he was content to keep an eye on them from afar using his spirit senses while focusing on his own progress, such as developing his skills. He had gotten a fair sense of their timetable after almost 2 months. Masaki spent the most of her time caring for the children and working as the Kurosaki clinic's receptionist during office hours. When she wasn't working as a receptionist, she was usually spending time with her children, taking care of the house, or going shopping. Isshin spent most of the day as the doctor at Kurosaki Clinic, caring for patients, and the rest of the time with his wife and children. Hisashi was irritated by his expression because if Isshin had been a little faster back then, Hisashi might not have died to white. It was absurd because he knew Isshin wasn't at fault, but you can't force yourself not to be frustrated if that's how you feel. Ichigo enjoyed going to a nearby karate dojo to practice and spend time with Tatsuki Arisawa after school. He was beaten. A lot. He didn't have many other pals to hang out with because he had already labeled him as the strange ghost kid and shunned him like the plague. Meanwhile, Yuzu and Karen spent the majority of their time in kindergarten or at home with Masaki. The twins were still too young, at only 5 years old, to have any serious activities outside of the house. Tatsuki Arisawa was the only other familiar Bleach character I had encountered because she was Ichigo's lone friend at the time. He hasn't met Chad or Orihime yet. He also went on a few dates with Haruko, getting to know each other better while having a good time. It also helped him become acquainted with Karakura town as they visited various sites around town. It was difficult to keep enough distance to conceal the fact that his form was a sham. However, being able to live a regular life for the first time in 4 years was immensely enjoyable, even if he couldn't be completely honest about his circumstances. In Karakura town, it was also his only source of entertainment. Unless you include watching people as fun, which he did not. He hoped he could take on human form, though. Even if Vasto Lord wasn't wholly human, He should be close enough that he could use illusions to mask the differences rather than being completely fabricated as he was now. As long as he had a humanoid shape and stature, he could hide any strange armor, carapace, wings, and so on. He would occasionally come across black cats while roaming around town, and each one made him uneasy. He hoped he'd be able to detect some type of spiritual signature or energy output from Yoruichi, but he wasn't ready to bet on it. Yoruichi gave a wide berth to any black cat that appeared, even though it was nearly hard for him to see through his illusions. Why didn't she have any distinguishing characteristics in her cat form? Something like a stylish collar or a bow. Had also found Urahara's store a few days in and made sure not to get too close to it just in case that insane bum did have some crazy means of detecting him that he couldn't possibly comprehend. Urahara was known for inventing bizarre items for no apparent purpose. Aside from that, he was willing to give it a shot. It was the third day in a row that it had rained, and he was becoming tired of staring at Masaki and Ichigo for so long. However, they were traveling in the rain when he noticed the small expressionless girl, that infernal Grand Fisher's lure, in the distance. It was just beside the riverbed, and the river had already swelled much beyond its customary boundaries as a result of the non-stop rain over the previous 3 days, and the water was running quickly and muddy, obscuring Grand Fisher. Naruto went ahead of the couple, scanning the area with his spiritual senses, and found Grand Fisher hidden in the river's shallows near where his lure was. Naruto proceeded to the other side of the river and entered it gently. Thankfully, the heavy rain and river rush muffled up almost any noise he made, making it even simpler to slide in unnoticed along with his invisibility. He swam up behind Grand Fisher, stalking it much as it stalked Masaki and Ichigo. He was preparing to entice them closer for his final lethal stroke, the one that would murder Masaki when she attempted to save Ichigo. Naruto was able to attack the unsuspecting Grand Fisher while focusing on his spiritual senses to determine what was going on outside of the water. Both to keep an eye on his 3 objectives as well as any outside forces that may appear. He had to strike at precisely the correct time. Then something happened. Ichigo observed the girl-like lure at the riverbank and ran away from his mother to try to save it as it appeared she was about to tumble into the river. His mother became alarmed and hurried after him. Grand Fisher began the final stage of his trap just as he was ready to reach the girl like bait and grasp her to drag her away from the river. He drew the lure towards him in the water, knocking Ichigo off balance. Grand Fisher brought his claws back, ready to strike. Masaki had recognized that something wasn't quite right about the girl and that she wasn't human. Masaki jumped towards Ichigo in an attempt to save him. While Grand Fisher was poised to strike, Naruto drew his right blade arm back slowly before suddenly shooting forward, penetrating Grand Fisher's skull from behind and destroying his mask in one fell swoop. Unfortunately, he never had the chance to reflect on his life. It was an unjustly merciful conclusion for such a monster. Plus 2300, X, P, XP, 31,650 31,650ths, plus 1 level, plus 1 bonus status point. XP, 1,532,450ths, mission finished, transcribe skill awarded. Transcribe. Based on Grand Fisher's ability to read someone's memories while piercing their body and identify the face of their most loved one. Instead, it enables the user to read and duplicate their memories, allowing them to master their ways. However, because this is confined to memories, the user can only apply techniques that they can physically accomplish. For example, a user can study how a hollow spouting poison works, but they won't be able to perform the technique without a poison gland. I think all that practice paid off in the end. That was almost too simple, he thought. He would have devoured him for spirit power if there had been enough time, but there wasn't. He had to finish his performance. He immediately shifted his illusionary aura, from rendering him invisible to creating a perfect replica of Grand Fisher himself. He jumped out of the river, revealing himself to the 2 of them in the manner of Grand Fisher. Ichigo became afraid, while Masaki panicked, knowing what was about to happen to them. She tried her hardest to protect Ichigo, but as she had lost her Quincy powers, she was unable to do so, and, Grand Fisher, Naruto opened his mouth wide as he dove towards her figure and swallowed her whole, leaving only a terrified and crying Ichigo on the riverside. He dove back into the river and reverted to being invisible before anyone could bother him. The vestiges of the genuine Grand Fisher had also vanished by this point, and he swam down the river as rapidly as he could for the following few minutes, managing more than 120 mph with the help of the river's flow. Masaki was retained in his mouth without being swallowed. She didn't even struggle at first since she was so shocked, but soon she got her composure. She began struggling ferociously, trying to escape his lips. Unfortunately, she was only slightly stronger than an average person. Having lost all of her Quincy powers, she was left with only her pure physical power, which for Quincy was nothing more than an in-shape human. It didn't take long for her to tire of battling the pressure in his mouth, and her resistance began to fade. Naruto erupted from the river surface after a few minutes, around 10 miles downstream, unfurling his wings from behind his carapace, allowing him to travel considerably quicker than he could swim. He sped away from Karakura at 675 miles per hour. He couldn't keep up this pace for long because it felt like sprinting at top speed, but the farther he could get away, the better, and he was afraid Masaki might suffocate if she stayed in his mouth for too long. He flew another 40 miles or so in around 10 minutes before landing in some kind of woodland location far from any human infrastructure and immediately vomited Masaki out. She began gulping for air right away, and she was already substantially weakened due to the battle and lack of oxygen. Well, that wasn't exactly how I expected to be eating a girl for the first time in my second life, he chuckles internally, unconsciously attempting to divert himself from the pain in the ass. When she regains her breath and some strength, she scrambles to her feet and backs away, leaning against a tree for protection, unsure of what else she can do. She has no idea where she is, no power, and most importantly, why the heck is she still alive? She also knows Hollow swallowed her and spit her out, but she couldn't see him for some reason. He should be right there, as he clearly spat her out. Did he abandon her while she was recuperating? Everyone understands that basic Hollow are primeval animals who prey on anything with spirit power. The more the merrier. According to logic, she should have died the instant he captured her and placed her in his mouth. Worse, she had no idea what had happened to her son. Well, hello there. Did you catch your breath? He asked hesitantly. She was taken aback. Though rare, some older basic Hollow would converse, but they never seemed to use it to truly communicate. Instead, they used it to further torment, control, and tease their prey. First and foremost, your son is fine, so relax, he replied, seeking to reassure her of what was obviously her greatest concern, even more than her own safety. Oh, right. I almost forgot to undo my camouflage. Let me change back. This must be quite uncomfortable, he exclaimed before she could even gather her thoughts and respond. He emerged out of nowhere, but she didn't recognize him because he appeared to be his typical self. She was taken aback when she saw this four-legged, two-armed bug-like Hollow. Where has the hamster gone? She was perplexed. Where is the other one? She inquired warily, checking the surrounds while dutifully keeping the tree covering her back from danger, fearful that she would be assaulted at any moment and that they were only playing with her. Oh, you mean this one? He questioned as he reverted to Grand Fisher's appearance. Masaki's eyes blinked. This was quite bizarre. Can it morph and become invisible? Is this just a regular Hollow? She questioned herself. Shit. Don't I sound like one of those psychologically unbalanced villain types monologuing now? Well, let's give it our all regardless, he thinks to himself. There was an awkward hush as they were both lost in contemplation and unsure how to go with this talk. Masaki was completely perplexed, and Hisashi was trying to come up with a solution. Well, this is going to take some explaining, so I guess starting from the beginning chronologically will be best, he says. Remember this kid? He asks, morphing into his original 16-year-old self before he died. He also described the exact outfit and equipment he wore that night. How do you know about him? Her face contorts in agony. She had always felt awful about someone dying and being too late to save them. If only she had left sooner. Worse, it was a boy even younger than she was, just an ordinary human being. She recalls the shattered body of the child who had died in that park. It had been nauseating. She was at least relieved that he hadn't turned into a Hollow as she almost did owing to White's poison. I don't know about him. That was me, he says flatly. That's impossible. His soul was already gone by the time we got back there, she adds, refusing to imagine that the person they failed to defend would have become a Hollow. The remarks that came from the familiar face were exceedingly repulsive. Did you really think they'd leave my soul behind after it got involved in their experiments? He said as he reverted to his hollow form. Their experiments? She inquired, hesitantly. Ishin had warned her there was more to it than just a strange hollow. Yeah. That hollow was an experiment by Soul Society's Captain SSK Eisen, who took me away after I was attacked by him and his associates and made me into what I am now, he continues. He unexpectedly unleashes Blood Vene, and an all too familiar pattern spreads across his skin, further startling Masaki. No way. That's Blood Vene for you. But only Quincy has access to it. She doesn't know what to think. A hollow should be unable to employ that skill, even more so than other spiritual creatures, because Quincy spirit power is poison to Hollow and Hollow spirit power is poison to Quincy. You're lying. You used that transformation or illusion power to do this, she replies, trying to hide her doubts and remorse. Naruto moans, this is really a pain. He removes Blood Vene, before slashing one of his arms deeply. There is a lot of blood on the ground. But it doesn't take long for his high-speed regeneration to take effect and totally cure the wound. Then he uses Blood Vene, again, this time with a lot of spirit strength, to slice the second arm. It only manages to scratch him this time. Are you happy now? He inquires. Or do you need to test it? If you want, you can check the blood to make sure it's real. He backs up to give her room in case she wants to. Masaki shakes her head, but walks over to the pool of blood, plunging her fingers in and rubbing them together. If it's all a hoax, it's a pretty convincing one, she thinks. However, she is beginning to suspect that Hisashi is more than just a typical hollow. Alright, if I believe you, what happened to you? She asks. Well, the attack did turn me into a hollow, and I was experimented on for over 10 years after I died there, and as you've seen, I can become virtually undetectable. They weren't aware how that power had developed, and it gave me an opportunity to escape during one of the experiments on me, he explains. When you don't have a face, it's much easier to lie convincingly. However, while I was imprisoned there, I did manage to hear some things about their plans, one of which involved an attack on you. Wait. You're the one who attacked me, she says. Not quite. Look, he adds before transforming into Grand Fisher, complete with lure. The lure then began to move away from him, but it vanished as soon as it reached the edge of his illusory aura, just beyond his arm's reach. That's the range of my ability. I wouldn't have been able to lure your son with this like the original Grand Fisher who drew him in and was poised to attack. I just knew he was going to attack you because it was planned. I killed him before he could complete the attack, then took his place to fake your death so you could survive without Aizen knowing. He explains. Your attack was part of a larger plan involving both the very top of Soul Society and Hueco Mundo, and they have already taken over Hueco Mundo's leadership, he reveals. Don't we need to warn them? She asks, recognizing the risk. No, your family, your Ahara, and associates, as well as the Soul Society, are under constant surveillance, and any move will force their hands to kill anyone involved in order to prevent the information from spreading. The only way is to strike at the right time. He slowly tries to lead her to see things his way. It's difficult because he wants to utilize her savior complex and guilty sentiments to move things forward, but if he triggers her savior complex too much and she ends up doing something that messes everything up for him, he'll have to take harsh steps. Roughly 6 years from now, Aizen plans to betray Soul Society, which is a moment of weakness for him when he gives up the Shinigami's support. Until then, they just see him as one of the nicest, most beloved captains in all of history. He tells her. As much as I'd like to let you return to your family now that the attack is over, I can't have you showing up and alerting them that you survived and revealing my existence, endangering my and my family's survival, he threatened. Masaki's blood grew cold as he neared the end of his statement, the sheer quantity of deadly intent he was emitting. She was certain he would kill her on the spot if he determined she posed a threat. A part of her understood. She felt the same way about her own family. Family? She mumbled, still shaken by his murderous intent. Well, I had a family before I died, he stated flatly, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Although she was becoming increasingly convinced, hollow and family were two notions that had no intersection in her thinking up to this point, and she had assumed he was acting only in his own self-interest. Before they died, every hollow had a family, although they were more inclined to eat them than defend them. Many of them did, in fact, end up eating their family. There has to be enough carrot to go along with the stick, Naruto reasoned. In exchange, I will help protect your family for the next 6 years, after which you should be safe to return without fear of Aizen's retaliation, and I'm even willing to reveal some information about what happened to Quincy if that interests you, he adds. Masaki was having difficulty. She wished to return to her family. However, if there was a risk to them and others, she didn't want to take that chance. Furthermore, unlike Naruto, even if she did return, she would be unable to protect them as she was now. She was also aware that something had occurred since she had lost all of her abilities. Masaki gave a nod. It was best to go along with things until she found out more, rather than do something risky for the time being. Alright, but what am I supposed to do? She inquired, hesitantly. Well, no offense, but I need to be able to keep an eye on you until I know I can trust you, he adds honestly, not hiding the reality from her. Oh, I don't mean literally. You just need to stay within my spiritual perception. If you leave, I will go after you and stop you. Currently, I can sense up to about 15 miles. As I get stronger, this should grow too, giving you more freedom as it does, he clarifies. Well, that might be worse, she reasoned, believing it wasn't as horrible as some of her other predictions that featured some type of incarceration. Though she suspected this was due to his confidence in capturing her, a typical human, rather than any genuine generosity on his behalf. As for what to do within that range, that's up to you, but I have something you could help me with, and I don't think it's too much to ask for me to save you and keep an eye on your family for you, he says. What do you want? She begs, unsure of what she could possibly provide that a hollow would be interested in. He says, I need you to train my sister. Train your sister. She almost stumbles, perplexed. What am I supposed to train her in? Alright, so he has a sister. Is she in need of a tutor or something? She was perplexed. She became a Fullbringer due to my fault. Although it's not the same, there should be enough overlap in all the systems that rely on spirit power for you to at least be able to teach her some useful things in mastering her power, especially since you've received formal training in it, he speculates. He felt she could at the very least teach her the fundamentals of things like spirit power, particles, and pressure management. I would teach her myself, but as a hollow, most of my powers are instinctual, so I'm not really a good fit to help her with her abilities, he says. In the meantime, you have 6 years to fill up, and in 6 years, I will be heading to Hueco Mundo, so I want my sister to be able to protect herself by then so I can leave with fewer worries. Oh, I forgot to mention we're also quite wealthy. If you agree, you won't have to worry about your living situation for the duration, he said. With their parents' salary and Mito's income from the company, taking care of another person wouldn't even make a difference in their monthly income. Masaki decided to stick with Naruto for the time being. This way, she would learn more about Naruto, and meeting his sister would help to prove his narrative and give her some leverage if she needed it. Also, assuming all was true, his offer looked more than acceptable to her. She had been saved, her family had been protected, she would have a place to stay and be cared for in the meantime, and all she had to do was teach someone part of her skills. Alright, she answered firmly, I'll believe you for now and agree. First and foremost, I would appreciate it if you didn't tell my sister about my being experimented on. My death and eventual return were traumatic enough as it was. She doesn't need to know. I just told her I was asleep during that time, he informed her. Masaki gave a nod. Okay, I can do that, she said simply. Great. In that case, we can go there right now, he murmured, crouching down and extending his claws to take her. She approached and climbed clumsily into his claws. Well, that went better than some of my worst-case scenarios, he reflected himself, exhaling a breath of relief. He instantly cast illusory aura on them and flew them back to Naruki City. He had to move a little slower because she was now a weak regular human and near 700 miles per hour winds are not something human flesh is intended to withstand, and flying at those speeds was also not pleasant because it felt like sprinting at your quickest. Masaki had already begun to feel more at ease since returning her to Naruki. Even if she had accepted his offer and agreed to his terms, he was still a hollow, and she would be wary of him. They land just outside his house, where he drops Masaki and transforms into a 23-year-old version of his former self. During his time with Haruko, he had grown to admire this appearance. He tapped on Reina's window to wake her up because it was becoming late. Mito awoke, and as soon as she heard the harsh ticking sound, she was awake. She hadn't heard it in about 2 months, but it was a very definite tap from his blades. She hurriedly dressed, went downstairs, and then out the door. She witnessed his current human form. Is that you, Naruto? She inquired, perplexed. It did resemble him, but up until this moment, he had only come to her in his 16-year-old form. He nodded, undoing his metamorphosis and revealing his true self. She dashed over to hug him as soon as he did. Masaki was taken aback, especially since she had been completely neglected up until this moment. So far, his tale seems to be correlating, she thinks. Where were you? Are you okay? What did you do? She said as she hugged him. All right, slow down, he chuckled. She finally let go and backed away a little, then noticed the strange woman standing next to him. She was a mature beauty with a slim figure, fair skin, long wavy light brown hair, and brown eyes, but she looked a complete mess. Her makeup was smudged, and her hair and clothing were slimy and dirty with who knows what. All right. Then who is this? She inquired. My name is Masaki Kurosaki. She's a friend I found who might be able to help you with your powers, he continued, smiling broadly. Mito quickly went from skeptical to ecstatic at the prospect of progress. And this is Uzumaki Mito, my little sister as well, Naruto began. Could I first borrow the shower or something? I feel so gross, Masaki said, a little impatient now that the shock and anxiety had worn off. Mito nodded, of course, come in. Come in, she said, ushering her inside to the restroom. Naruto was immediately left behind by the two women, and he decided to go on a little hunt nearby because he had been out of town for quite some time. Mito ended up obtaining some of her own clothes for Masaki because the ones she was wearing were probably unsalvageable, and she ended up grabbing her a skirt because most of her pants would be too long and fit uncomfortably owing to Masaki's low stature in comparison to herself. Masaki had just gotten out of the shower after changing into her new clothes, feeling refreshed and human again. Naruto was still out patrolling, so Mito led Masaki to the living room, still confused and intrigued by this new person, making sure to keep down because it was still the middle of the night and they didn't want to wake her parents. Thank you, Masaki said. Mito replied with a big smile, of course. Since she is training me and can see brother, she must have some power, right? She reasoned. So, what are you going to do? She inquired, excitedly. Instead of the expected response, Masaki appeared embarrassed and awkward. Nothing anymore, she says, her smile slightly strained and awkward. I'm sorry, Mito said hurriedly, realizing she had stumbled on a slightly touchy subject. Masaki raised her head and sighed, then relaxed her shoulders. No, it's fine. I used to have abilities, but I lost them. Given that I'll be teaching you, how about you tell me a little bit about yourself? She explained. Well, I'm 20 years old now. Things were quite routine before brother returned 2 years ago. We suffered for many years after he was murdered. Well, our parents still do at times, she sighs. She wishes she could tell them, but she understands that unless they had a way for their parents to see her brother without gaining high spirit power, or if they were capable of protecting them if they did, telling them wasn't a good idea because they would probably think she was delusional due to grief or stress. Do they have no idea? Masaki inquired. No, they're still regular people, she explained. As a child, I was spoiled rotten by my mother and Naruto. Really, nothing out of the ordinary. At home, I enjoyed playing with Naruto. He would occasionally create computer games for us to play together. I was performing well in school at the time. Naruto then died. It was challenging for a while. I had difficulty getting to school, and I was both sad and angry at times. I lost a lot of friends, and my grades suffered as a result. I relied heavily on my mother to get through that period, or perhaps we got through it together. She takes a deep breath and pauses for a few moments. Masaki struggles to hold back her emotions as she feels partly responsible for everything Naruto and her family have gone through, but this wasn't her moment, so she shoved it down. Things gradually improved, and my grades began to improve by middle school. I began to make new pals. Things were gradually returning to normalcy. Then, a few years ago, I was assaulted by some filth, but I was protected before they could do too much damage. I couldn't really make out what saved me, and it was all blurry, she remarked regarding Naruto's reappearance. I noticed the same blur would appear near our house or follow me around at times after that. I was afraid at first, but as time passed, I realized it didn't intend any harm and even felt slightly familiar. He kept becoming clearer over time until I could recognize him well as you've seen him, she replied, unsure how to explain him. Masaki nodded, remaining silent to allow her to finish her story. This was useful information for her, and so far, Naruto's story was corroborated by his sister. Although he became clear enough for me to recognize and even hear him, despite the fact that he couldn't really talk back, I pretended I couldn't see him. Then 2 additional hollows assaulted our house, and he defended us. After that, I chased him down and discovered he could communicate. That's how I discovered he was truly my brother, she says with a sweet smile. Then he showed me how to use and update the operating system he had written before dying. I improved it and founded Ishoni to release it using his software as a foundation. Wait a minute. I recognize that name. That is run by my PC. Wait. You say Naruto created it first? But he was only 16 years old at the time. She was taken aback by the magnitude of the revelation. Well, like the name of the company, I like to think we made it together, Mito responds, but the core of the operating system was indeed completely made by him over 14 years ago. Masaki could sense how pleased she was of her brother, herself, and all they had accomplished just by looking at her. I dropped out of college and started working full-time for the company. I was kidnapped not long after the company became a huge success. Brother did arrive to save me, but not before I awoke my powers. Then he went 2 months ago and returned with you. Reina concluded. Well, that was a long one, but it covered everything important. So, how about you? She inquired. Masaki was relieved to learn that Naruto was telling the truth and was indeed the kid from back then. That would be the only way for him to explain the program he wrote himself to her, so he couldn't be deceiving her. However, she wasn't sure how much to say about herself. I was raised in a special family full of people with special abilities, and I was trained to fight hollows. Then I was attacked by a hollow, and he came to my rescue. Then, as a thank you, I decided to assist him by training you, she explained, offering a very simplified version of events for the time being because she was not comfortable disclosing much about her personal life. To be continued.
That's it for this podcast. Thanks for listening to this video. I hope you did enjoy this pretty story, and if you did, like, share, and subscribe for more. And thank you all for helping support, and have a great day.